Chapter 16. There will be no Thanksgiving this week, announced Matthew when he came home at noontime the next day. It seems we have no authority here in Connecticut to declare our own holidays. His Excellency, the new governor, will declare a Thanksgiving when it pleases him. Oh dear, exclaimed Judith in disappointment. We had planned such a lovely day, and Mercy has pies baked already. We can be thankful among ourselves that we have an abundance to eat and the good health to enjoy it. But there won't be any games and the train band won't drill? There is no occasion to celebrate, he reminded her. Better for the young people to remember that idleness breeds mischief. A disgraceful thing happened last night. Never since we have lived in Wethersfeld has there been such a disturbance on All Hallows Eve. I thought I heard some shouting, said Rachel. It reminded me of home. In England, the boys used to light bonfires and march through the streets. Such things are best not mentioned, her husband silenced her. All Saints' Day is a Papist feast, but our own young people had no share in this, thank goodness. 'Twas a rowdy band of rivermen from a trading ship. Did they do any damage? Little enough, since we have a constable who was quick to his duty. The three ringleaders are cooling their heels now in this shed, and on lecture day they will sit for all to see in the town stocks. What did they do, father? Inquired Judith coolly. Across the table, her eyes met Kit's deliberately. They came roistering into town just before midnight. I am sorry to tell you, Catherine, your friend William Ashby seems to have been the only one singled out for their insulting prank. Kit dared not to ask the question, but her uncle went on. They illuminated his house, he told them gravely. You mean they burned it down? Gasped Rachel. No, they well might have. They put lanterns in the window frames that are waiting for the new panes. Lanterns made out of pumpkin heads with candles inside and unholy faces cut in the sides to show the light. Jack-o'-lanterns? Exclaimed Judith. Kit choked suddenly on a giggle that rose unexpectedly from nowhere. Instantly, she was horrified at herself, and in mortified confusion kept her eyes on the wooden trencher before her. Her uncle shot a suspicious glare at the two girls. Whatever they are called, they are the devil's intention. 'Twas an outrageous piece of blasphemy. I trust they will be dealt with severely. Thursday lecture day, the day of public punishment, was 2 days away. Somehow, Kit knew she would have to endure the waiting, though actually she knew already what she would see. It did no good to remind herself that there were dozens of trading ships on the river, and that the Dolphin might well be out to sea by now. Kit had no doubt at all who one at least of the culprits in the stocks would be, and neither, by the smug set of her pretty lips, had Judith. By Thursday, noon, Kit gave up trying to keep her mind on her work. No matter how she shrank from the ordeal before her, she knew she could not stay away. The one thing she could not face was the thought of taking that walk to the meeting house in the presence of Judith. An hour before meeting time, when all the family seemed occupied, she slipped out of the house and set out along High Street with a hard little lump of dread crowding her ribs. At first she could barely glimpse the stocks. They were surrounded by the usual crowd of idlers and passers-by. It was net place for a girl alone. But she had to see. Clenching her fists tight, she moved closer. Yes, they were all three Dolphin men, and none of them showed the slightest sign of repentance. One of the three sat with his head swollen down in disgust. Nate and the red-headed seaman who had painted the Dolphin's figurehead that morning on the river were cheerfully exchanging insults with a cluster of young bound boys who had stopped to enjoy the spectacle. The two culprits holding their own in an unchastened manner that delighted the onlookers. In spite of their ready answers, the sport had been one-sided, as Kit could see by the daubs of mud that had stained the rough boards of the stocks. even as she watched an apple core sail through the air and bounced off Nate's forehead. A cheer went up at such marksmanship, but Nate's comment drew an even louder roar of approval. "Watch your tongue, you scoundrel," shouted a farmer, catching sight of Kit's flustered face. "There is a lady present." Nate twisted his head the inch or so that the boards allowed him and stared at her without the slightest recognition. Her presence had spoiled the sport. The servant boys drifted away, and presently the three prisoners sat for a moment neglected. Impelled by some urge, half pity and half annoyance, Kit came forward from the shelter of the trees. Nate watched her come without a dicker in his blue eyes. Now that she stood directly in front of him, she could see the bruise that the careless missile had left. Suddenly, she felt the tears rising. "Kit, for heaven's sakes," Nate hissed in an exasperated whisper, "get away from this place, quick!" Deliberately, Kit stepped closer. She marked the way with tight boards were chafing the hard brown wrists. "This is horrible, Nate," she burst out. "I can't bear to see you in this hateful thing." "I'm quite comfortable, thank you," he assured her. "Don't waste your pity on me. 'Tis as roomy as many a ship's berth I've slept in." "Isn't there anything I can do? Are you hungry?" "You can stop trying to be a lady of mercy. 'Twas well worth it. I'd gladly sit here another 5 hours for a sight of Sir William's face that evening." He was impossible. With a flounce of petticoat, she turned away. It did not help to note that her foolish concern had been witnessed by a whole group of early lecture goers. This would certainly give them something to wag their tongues over. Held high, head held high, she forced herself to keep a ladylike pace. At the door of the meeting house, she stopped to read the posted notice. "That's for stealing pumpkins for a field. That for stealing pumpkins from a field and for kindling a fire in a dwelling, that these shall be sealed in the stocks from 1 hour before the lecture till 1 hour after. That they shall pay a fine of 40 shillings each, and that they be forbidden hereafter, on certainty of 30 lace at the whipping post, to enter the boundaries of the township of Weathersfield." Kit's courage failed her altogether. She simply could not go into that meeting house. She could not bear to sit there and hear that sentence read aloud. She could not face the family or the whispering and staring that would turn her own family pew into a pillory. Gathering her skirts about her, hurried across the she hurried across the green, skirted the square in a wide air, and lied home to her uncle's house. Flied home to her uncle's house. It was the first time since she had come to Weathersfield in the spring that she had dared to miss a Thursday lecture. The family had already left for the meeting house, and Mercy, busy at her spinning wheel, did not hear her return. Kit crept up the stairs, but the empty bedchamber was not the refuge she needed. She had to talk to someone. Mercy would listen with gentleness, of course. But how could she ever explain to Mercy about Nate? There was only one person who could understand. "It is a good chance to take Hannah the piece of cloth, anyway," Kit reasoned. "At least this one afternoon I can be very sure of not meeting any seafaring friends there." She stole down the stairs again and took a winding path through the back meadow to Blackbird Pond. "Don't fret, child," Hannah said philosophically, when Kit had poured out the story. "The stocks aren't so dreadful. I've been in them myself." "But Nate is banished from Weathersfield. He won't be able to leave the ship or to come to see you any more." "Well, now that is a shame," agreed Hannah, unperturbed. In spite of her woe, Kit had to smile. Why hadn't she remembered that ever since he was 8 years old, Nate had been finding his way to Blackbird Pond through devious meadow routes? Hannah knew that no threats could keep Nate from coming again. As always, here in this house, things seemed to look much less desperate. "This William Ashby," Hannah said thoughtfully. "I never heard Nate mention him." Had he come to call the night that Nate walked home with me? Nate met him there. He had come to call the night that Nate walked home with me. Nate met him there. Does thee mean he had come to call on thee? Yes. Why hadn't she ever told Hannah about William? Is the young man courting thee, Kit? Kit looked down at her hands. I guess you'd call it that, Hannah. Hannah's shrewd little eyes studied the girl's downcast face. Does thee plan to marry him? She asked gently. I I don't know. They all expect me to. Does thee love him? How can I tell, Hannah? He is good and he's fond of me. Besides, Kit's voice was pleading, if I don't marry him, how shall I ever escape from my uncle's house? Bless thee, child, said Hannah softly. Perhaps 'tis the answer. But remember, thee has never escaped at all if love is not there. Presently Kit opened the door to Prudence's timid knock and was comforted by the pleasure that rushed into the child's face. Prudence had further news of the culprits. Nate won't be able to come to see you, she told Hannah. They marched the three of them straight to the landing and put them on the Dolphin. But Nate waved to me as he went by. You know Nate? Kit asked the child, surprised. Of course I know him. He comes to see Hannah. Last time he listened to me read. Why should it disturb her to think of Nate sharing the reading lessons? Kit wondered, trying to be reasonable. How many of his visits had she missed? She was a little jealous to think of them all here cozily together while she was hard at work in the cornfield. Annoyed at herself, she picked up the sail-racked bundle. He sent you a present, though, she told Hannah brightly. Hannah ruefully surveyed the length of gray woolen. Now, isn't that kind of Nate, she exclaimed. So soft and tight-woven, much too fine for the likes of me. But thee knows, the truth is, these old eyes of mine can't even see to thread a needle. Then Prudence and I will make you a dress, promised Kit blithely. Can you sew, truly? Demanded Prudence, overwhelmed at still another accomplishment. Of course I can sew. I've never made a woolen dress, but I learned to embroider before I was your age. I'll borrow a pattern and scissors from Mercy, and you'll see. While the reading lesson began, Kit spread the cloth on the floor, turning it this way and that, as she had seen Mercy do, trying to plan how to use the length to the best advantage. The idea of cutting and sewing a dress by herself was novel and exciting. Will you really let me sew some of the stitches? Asked Prudence, watching her with shining eyes. Really and truly, promised Kit, smiling back at her. What fun it would be to make something warm and pretty for Prudence, she thought with longing. Did they never give the child anything decent to wear? Those skimpy sleeves did not even cover her elbows, and the scratchy, linsey woolsey cloth kept her thin shoulders constantly twitching. She knew she could never give Prudence even the smallest gift. The lessons were risky enough. Looking at the child, Kit felt again a fleeting uneasiness. What misery would be the child's lot if these meetings were discovered? The miracle that had been taking place before their eyes had made it all too easy to forget the danger. For Prudence was an entirely different child from the woe-begone, shrinking creature who had stood in the roadway outside the school. The tight little bud that was the real Prudence had steadily opened its petals in the sunshine of Kit's friendship and Hannah's gentle affection. Her mind was quick and eager. She had memorized the horn book in a few days' time and sped through the primer. After that, she had plunged headlong into the only other reading matter available, Hannah's tattered Bible. Kit had chosen the Psalms to begin with, and slowly, syllable by syllable, Prudence was spelling out the lines, while Hannah sat listening, her own lips often moving with the child in the lines she remembered and could no longer read. There were days on end, of course, when Kit could not manage to keep the tryst, but Hannah and Prudence were fast friends now, and she knew that reading went companionably on. There were more frequent days when Prudence could not escape her mother's sharp eye, and other days where her small face looked so pinched and exhausted that Kit wondered painfully if the child had been punished for tasks she had left unfinished. Always before she had been able to shake off her doubts. But today she had had too sharp a lesson in the retribution of this Puritan colony. For the first time, she felt a twinge of real fear. Hannah, she said softly over Prudence's head, I'm afraid to go on like this. What would happen if they found us out? Nate is strong enough to take it, but Prudence? Yes, agreed Hannah quietly. I know that soon thee would begin to consider that. What should I do, Hannah? Has thee looked for an answer? Prudence looked up. You won't say I can't come, Kit, she pleaded. I don't care what they do to me. I can stand anything if you'll let me come. Of course you can come, said Kit, stooping to give a child a reassuring hug. We'll find an answer somehow. Look now, I've bought you a present too. From her pocket she drew three precious objects that had required some ingenuity to gather: a partly used copybook from her trunk, a small bottle of ink, and a quill pen. "'Tis high time you learned to write," she said. "Oh, Kit, now, this very minute?" "This very minute. Watch me carefully." Opening to a clean page, she carefully wrote the child's name on the first page. Prudence. Now see if you can copy that. The small hand trembled so that the first eager stroke sent a great blot of ink sprawling across the page. Prudence raised stricken eyes. "Oh, Kit, I've spoiled your lovely book." "'Tis no matter. You should see the great blots I used to make. Now very carefully." Finally it was completely written. Prudence in quite respectable letters, without a single blot. Prudence was awestruck at her own handiwork. Hannah came to peer closely and admire. "Let me do it again," pleaded the child. "This time I won't make the R so wiggly." She grasped the quill in tense, careful fingers, and her lips silently formed each letter as she traced the lines. Over her bent head, Kit and Hannah exchanged an affectionate smile. For a time they both sat listening to the small sounds in the house, the scratching of the pen, the rustling and snapping of the fire, and the slow purr of the yellow cat. How peaceful it is, thought Kit, lazily stretching her toes near to the blaze. Why is it that even the fire in Hannah's hearth seems to have a special glow, like the sunshine on the day that I sat on that new thatch with Nate? If only, right now, on that bench across the hearth. But what a ridiculous daydream this was. Kit shook herself upright. "'Tis too dark to work any more," she said. Prudence laid down the quill with a long sigh, and plopping down on the hearth, dragged the limp, drowsy cat into her arms. "I wish I could live here with you and the cat," she said wistfully, laying her thin cheek across the soft golden fur. "I wish thee could too, child," said Hannah gently. "Remember Nate said it was like the psalm I was reading that day?" the child said dreamily. "Peace be within thy walls." "Well," Kit interrupted too briskly, "there won't be any peace anywhere if we don't get home in a hurry." She flung open the cottage door, and a bit of milkweed whisked in on a rush of November wind, spilling shreds of spiderly white down. Prudence ran back to ding her arms about Hannah. Kit would remember many times the picture she carried with her along the darkening road. Was there some premonition, she would wonder, that made the moment so poignant? Some foreknowledge that this was the last afternoon the three of them would ever spend together in the small cottage? She would remember, too, that all the way home she tried without success to find the answer that Hannah had promised could always be found in her own heart. Rachel greeted her reproachfully. "You're very late, Kit. It was wrong of you to stay away from lecture. Your uncle was very displeased. And John Holbrook walked back with us to say goodbye to you and Mercy." "Goodbye? Where is John going?" Rachel looked across the room at Judith, who was setting the table near the fire. But Judith, her eyes red from weeping, said nothing. "What has happened, Aunt Rachel?" asked Kit, bewildered. "John has enlisted in the militia. There's a detachment going out from Hartford to aid some of the towns north of Hadley in Massachusetts against the Indian attacks, and John volunteered to go with them." "To fight?" Kit was too astonished to be tactful. "Why, John is the last person I'd think to be a soldier. 'Tis a doctor they need, and John has learned a good deal of medicine this year." "But why now, right in the middle of his studies?" "I think it was his way of breaking with Dr. Bulkley," exclaimed Rachel. "He has tried so hard, poor boy, to reconcile Gersham's ideas with his own upbringing. Now it seems the doctor is going to publish a treaty in favor of Governor Andros and the new government, and John just couldn't stomach it any longer. We all think it is to his credit." "I don't," spoke up Judith. "I think it is nothing but stubbornness." "That's not fair, Judith." Dorothy spoke from the hearth. She looked a little more pale and tired than usual. "I think you should be proud of him." "Well, I'm not," answered Judith. "What difference does it make what Dr. Buckley writes? Now John won't get a church of his own, and he can never get married or build a house." Her tears broke out afresh. "He'll come back," Rachel reminded her. "The trip was only to be for a few weeks. He'll be gone for Christmas. If he cared anything about me, he wouldn't have gone at all." "For shame, Judith," said her mother. "You had better dry those tears before your father comes in." Mercy spoke thoughtfully. "Try to understand, Judith," she said slowly. "Sometimes it isn't that a man doesn't care. Sometimes he has to prove something to himself. I don't think John wanted to go away. I think somehow he had to." Judith had shut her mind to any consolation. "I don't know what you're talking about," she snapped. "All I know is we were perfectly happy, and now he has spoiled everything." Chapter 17. 5 days after John Holbrook's departure, Judith fell ill. Her mother, inclined at first to attribute her complaints to moping, took a second look at her flushed cheeks and put her to bed. Within 2 more days, alarm had spread to every corner of Weathersfield. 16 children and young people were stricken with the mysterious fever, and none of the familiar remedies seemed to be of any benefit. For days Judith tossed on the cot they had spread for her out in the front of the hearth, burning with fever, fretful with pain, and often too delirious to recognize the 3 women who hovered about her. The young surgeon was summoned from Hartford to bleed her, and a nauseous brew of ground roasted toads was forced between her cracked lips, to no avail. The fever simply had to run its course. On the 4th day, Kit felt chilly and lightheaded, and by twilight she was thankful to sink down on the mat they dragged to the fireside near her cousin. Her bout with the malady was short, however. Her white young body, nourished by Barbados fruits and sunshine, had an elastic vitality, and she was back on her feet, while Judith was still barely sitting up to sip her gruel. Dressing rather shakily, Kit was compelled to ask Mercy's assistance with the buttons down her back, and was shocked when her older cousin suddenly bent double in a violent fit of coughing. Kit whirled round on her. "How long have you been coughing like that?" she demanded. "Let me feel your hand." "Aunt Rachel, for heaven's sakes, get Mercy to bed quick. Here she's trying to wait on us." Tears of protest and weakness ran down Mercy's cheeks as Rachel stooped to take her oldest daughter's shoes. Kit's heated the warming pan to take the chill off Mercy's bed in the corner, and Mercy buried her face in the pillows as though it were a shame past bearing that she should amuse so much trouble. Mercy was seriously ill. Twice the young doctor rode out from Hartford to bleed her. The third time he took looking soberly down at her. I dare not bleed her further, he said helplessly. Rachel raised timid eyes to her husband. Matthew, do you think that perhaps Gershom Bulkley might know something to help her? He is so skilled. Matthew's lips tightened. I have said that man does not come into my house, he reminded her. We will hear no more about it. Rachel, already worn from the long vigil with Judith, was near the breaking point. Matthew, after working in the fields all day, forced his wife, against her will, to get some rest while he sat by his daughter's bedside at night. Judith watched helplessly, still too weak to even comb her own hair. The meals fell to Kit, and she did the best she could with them, measuring out the cornmeal, stirring up the pudding, spooning it into a bag of boil, and cursing the clumsiness that she had never taken the pains to overcome. She built up the fire, heated kettles of water for the washing so that Mercy might have fresh linens under her restless body. She fetched water and strained a special gruel for Judith and spread her uncle's wet clothes to dry before the fire. At night she dozed off, exhausted, and woke with a start, sure that something was left undone. Mercy lay on some remote borderland between sleeping and waking. Nothing could rouse her, and every breath was such a painful struggle that the slow rasp of it filled the whole house. Fear seeped in at the corners of the room. The family dared not speak above a whisper, though certainly Mercy was beyond hearing. On the fourth morning of Mercy's illness, Matthew did not go to work at all, but sat heavily at the table turning the pages of the Bible, searching in vain for some hope to cling to, or shut himself in the company room where they heard his heavy tread back and forth, the length of the room. Toward noontime, he took down his coat from the peg. I am going out for a time, he said hoarsely. He had one sleeve in the coat when a knock sounded at the door, and as he drew back, the bolt of a man's voice grated harshly through the silent room. Let me in, man, I've something to say. Matthew Wood stepped back from the door, and the Reverend Bulkley loomed on the kitchen threshold. Matthew, he said, you're a stubborn mule and a rebel, but this is no time for politics. Time was your Mercy was like my own daughter. Let me see her, Matthew. Let me see what I can do, with God's help, to save her. Matthew's voice was almost a sob. Come in, Gershom, he choked. God bless you. I was coming to fetch you. Dr. Bulkley's solid presence brought to them all new hope. I have a theory, he told them. I've read something like it, and 'twill do no harm to try. Cook me some onions in a kettle. For 4 long hours Kit labored at Dr. Bulkley's bidding. She sliced onions, blinking her eyes against the stinging tears. She kept the fire blazing under the iron kettle. When the onions were cooked to just the right softness, Dr. Bulkley piled them in a mass on a linen napkin and applied the blistering poultice to Mercy's chest. As soon as the poultice cooled, a new one must be ready. Late in the afternoon, the doctor rose to his feet. There are others I must tend to, he muttered. Keep her warm. I'll be back before midnight. Kit busied herself to prepare a meal which none of them could eat. With the fingers so heavy from fatigue and fear that she could scarcely force them to move, she cleared the table and put away the untouched food. She wondered if ever again she would escape from the sound of that dreadful breathing. Her own lungs ached with every sighing breath that Mercy drew. Then, without warning, A new fear came rushing in upon her. From without the house, from without the house, there was an approaching sound. I think that's supposed to say within. From within the house, there was an approaching sound of stamping feet and murmuring voices, gathering volume in the roadway outside. There was a crashing knock on the outer door. The three women's eyes met in consternation. Matthew Wood reached the door in one stride and flung it open. "How dare you?" he demanded in a low voice, angered. "Know you not there is illness here?" "Aye, we know right enough," a voice replied. "There is illness everywhere. We need your help to put a stop to it." "What do you want?" "We want you to come along with us. We're going for the witch." "Get away from my house at once," ordered Matthew. "You'll listen to us first," shouted another voice, "if you know what's good for your daughter." "Keep your voices down, then, and be quick," warned Matthew. "I have no time to listen to such foolishness." "It is foolishness that there is a house in this town, but it has a sick child in it. You do well to heed what we say, Matthew Wood. John Wetherell's boy died today. That makes three dead, and it's the witch's doing." "Whose doing? What are you driving at, man?" "The Quaker woman's, down by Blackbird Pond. She's been a curse on this town for years with her witchcraft." The voices sounded hysterical. "We should have run her out long ago. Time and again she's been seen consorting with the devil down in that meadow. Now she's put a curse on our children. God knows how many more will be dead before morning." "This is nonsense," scoffed Matthew Wood impatiently. "There's no old woman and no witchcraft either could bring on a plague like this." "What is it then?" shrilled a woman's voice. Matthew passed a hand over his forehead. "The will of God," he began helplessly. "The curse of God, you mean," another voice screamed. "His judgment on us for harboring an infidel and a Quaker. You'd better come with us, Matthew. Your own daughter's like to die. You can't deny it." "I'll have naught to do with it," said Matthew firmly. "I'll hold with no witch hunt." "You'd better hold with it," the woman's voice shrilled suddenly. "You'd better look to the witch in your own household." "At that high and mighty niece of yours, where she spends her time," another woman shouted from the darkness. "Ask her what she knows about your Mercy's sickness." The weariness dropped suddenly from Matthew Wood. With his shoulders thrown back, he seemed to tower in the doorway. "Be gone from my house," he roared, with his caution drowned in anger. "How dare you speak the name of a good, God-fearing girl? Any man who slanders one of my family has to reckon with me." There was a silence. "No harm meant," a man's voice said uneasily. "'Tis only woman's talk." "If you won't come, there's plenty more in the town who will," said another. "What are we wasting our time for?" The voices receded down the pathway, rising again in the darkness beyond. Matthew bolted the door and turned back to the dumbfounded women. "Did they wake her?" he asked dully. "No," sighed Rachel. "Even that could not disturb her, poor child." For a moment there was no sound but the tortured breathing. Kit had risen to her feet and stood clinging to the table's edge. Now the new fear that was stifling her broke from her lips in an anguished whisper. "What will they do to her?" Her aunt looked up in alarm. Matthew's black brows drew together darkly. "What concern of that is yours?" "I know her," she cried. "She's just a poor, helpless old woman. Oh, please tell me, will they harm her?" "This is Connecticut," answered Matthew sternly. "They will abide by the law. They will bring her to trial, I suppose. If she can prove herself innocent, she is safe enough." "But what will they do to her now, tonight, before the trial?" "How do I know? Leave off your questions, girl. Is there not enough trouble going on in our own house tonight? He lowered himself into a chair and sunk his head into his hands. Go and get some sleep, Kit, urged Rachel, dreading any more disturbance. We may need you later on. Kit stared from one to the other, half frantic with helplessness. They were not going to do anything. Unable to stop herself, she burst into tears and ran from the room. Upstairs in her own room, she stood leaning against the door, trying to collect her wits. She would have to go, she would have to get to Hannah. No matter what happened, she could not stay here and leave Hannah to face that mob alone. If she could get there in time to warn her, that was as far as she could just see now. She snatched her cloak from the peg and carried her leather boots in her hand, crept down the stairs. She dared not try to unbolt the great front door, but instead tiptoed cautiously through the cold company room into the back chamber and let herself out the shed door into the garden. She could hear shouts in the distance, and slipping hurriedly into her boots, she fled along the roadway. In Meeting House Square, she leaned against a tree for an instant to get her bearing. The crowd was gathering, a good 20 men and boys and a few women carrying flaring pine torches. In the hoarse shouting and the heedless screaming of the women, there was a mounting voice, and a terror she had never known before closed over Kit's mind like fog. For a moment her knees sagged, and she caught at the tree for support. Then her mind cleared again, and skirting the square, darted from tree to tree like a savage. She made her way down Broad Street and out onto South Road. She had never before seen the meadows by moonlight. They lay serene and still, wrapped in thin veils of drifting mist. She found the path easily, passed from dark clump of willows, past the dark clump of willows, and saw ahead the deep shining pool that was Blackbird Pond, and a faint reddish glow that must be Hannah's window. Hannah's door was not even bolted. Inside, by the still flickering embers of the hearth, Hannah sat nodding in her chair, fast asleep. Kit touched the old woman's shoulder gently. Hannah, dear, she said, struggling to control her panting breath. Wake up! 'Tis Kit, you've got to come with me quickly. What is it? Hannah jerked instantly awake. Is it a flood? Don't talk, Hannah. Just get into this cloak. Where are your shoes? Here, hold your foot out, quick. Now, there was not a moment to spare. As they stepped into the darkness, the clamor of voices struck against them. The torches looked very near. Not that way. Down the path to the river. In the shelter of the dark bushes, Hannah faltered, catching at Kit's arm. She could not be budged. Kit, why are those people coming? Hush, Hannah, dear, please. I know that sound. I've heard it before. They're coming for the Quakers. No, Hannah, come, Shame on thee, Kit. Thee knows a Quaker does not run away. Thomas will take care of us. Desperately, Kit shook the old woman's shoulders. Oh, Hannah, what shall I do with you? Of all the times, Hannah, to turn vague. But Hannah's brief resolution suddenly gave way, and all at once she clung to Kit, sobbing like a child. Don't let them take me again, she pleaded. Where is Thomas? I can't face it without Thomas. This time, Kit succeeded in half dragging the sobbing woman through the underbrush. They made a terrible rustling and snapping of twigs as they went, but the noise behind them was still louder. The crowd had reached the cottage now. There was a crashing, as though the furniture were being hurled into splinters against the wall. She was here. The fire is still burning. Look behind the woodpile. She can't have gone far. There's the cat, screeched a woman in terror. Look out! There is a shot, then two more. It got away, disappeared into thin air. There's no bullet could kill that cat. Here's the goats. Get rid of them too. Hold, or there, I'll take the goats. Witched or no, goats is worth a shilling, 20 shillings apiece. Scotch the witch out. Fire the house. Give us a light to search by. Desperately, the two women pushed on over a marshy bog that dragged at their feet, through a cornfield where the neglected shocks hid their scurry figures, past a brambly tangle to the shelter of the poplar trees in the broad moonlight stretch of the river. There they had to halt, crouching against a fallen log. Behind them, a flare of light, redder than the moon light, lit up the meadows. There was a hissing and crackling. My house, cried out Hannah so heedlessly that Kit clapped a hand over her mouth. Our own house. That's the one Thomas built. With her tears running down her own cheeks, Kit flung both arms around the trembling woman, and together they huddled across the log and watched till the red glow lessened and died away. For a long time the thrashing in the woods continued. Once voices came very close, and the search party went thracking through the cornfield. Two men came out on the bench, not 20 feet away from where they hid. Could she swim the river, think you? Not likely. Not use going on like all this. No use going on like this all night, Jem. I've had enough. There's another day coming. The men climbed back up the river bank. When the voices died away, it was very still. Serenity flowed back over the meadows. The veil of mist was again unbroken. After a long time, Kit dared to stretch her aching muscles. It was bitterly cold and damp here by the river's edge. She drew Hannah's slight figure closer against her, like a child's, and presently the woman's shuddering ceased, and Hannah drifted into the shallowing napping of the very old. There was no such escape for Kit. Her first surge of relief soon died away, and her thoughts, numbed by the sheer terror of pursuit, began to stir again in hopeless circles. What chance did they have when morning came? Should she rouse Hannah now and push on down the river? But where could they go? Hannah was exhausted. All her strength seemed to have died with the dying flames of her house. She could take Hannah home with her, where at least there would be warm clothes and hot food, but her uncle was a selectman. It would be his bounden duty to turn Hannah over to the law, and once they had foolish girl who was suspected of being a witch herself, Hannah could not even be trusted to answer the questioning straight, like as her mind would wander and she would talk about Thomas. Yet as the long hours wore away, Kit could find no better solution. Whatever might happen, Hannah needed immediate care. Even the jail would be better than this unprotected place. As the first gray light slanted along the river, Kit made up her mind. They would not risk the main roads. They would pick their way along the shore of the river and cut through the meadows back to her uncle's house. Then, unbelievably, out of the mist came the miracle. First 2 points of mast, then sails, transparent and wraith-like in the fog. Then, as Kit strained her eyes, the looming hull, the prow, and the curved tail of a fish. The dolphin! Glory be to heaven! The most beautiful sight in the world. The dolphin moving down toward Wright's Island on a steady breeze. Kit leaped to her feet. Hannah, wake up! Look! Look there! Her stiff lips could scarcely babble. She flung her arms into the air, waving wildly. She could hear a man's voice across the water, but with fog rolled tantalizing between her and the ship. She tore off her petticoat and waved it hysterically, but she dared not shout, and if she could not attract their notice, the dolphin would sail past down the river and their chance would be gone. Kicking off her shoes, Kit waded into the water, plunged in, and struck out toward the ship. It was a very short swim, but she had overdrawn her strength for days past. She was panting when the black hull loomed over her head and at first she could barely raise her voice above the wash of the shore. She drew a careful breath and tried again. There was a cry above her and a sound of running feet. Ahoy! All hands! Man overboard! "'Tis a woman! Hold on there, ma'am, we're coming!" She heard shouted orders, a thumping and creaking of ropes. Then the lifeboat swung out over her head and lowered with a smack into the water. Nate and the red-headed sailor were inside, and she had never before been so happy to see anyone. "I knew it," groaned the red-headed one as she clung grasping to the side of the boat. "Kit, what kind of a game is this?" "Hannah, she's in trouble, Nate. They burned her house. Please, can you take her on the Dolphin?" They dragged her over the side of the boat. "Where is she?" Nate demanded. "Tell the captain to heave to," he yelled up toward the deck. "We're going ashore." "There," pointed Kit, "by that pile of logs. We've been there all night. I didn't know what to do, and when I saw the ship—" All at once she was sobbing and babbling like a 3-year-old about the witch hunt and the chase through the cornfield and the man who had come so close. Nate's hands closed over her hand, hers, hers hard and steady. "'Tis all right, Kit," he said over and over. "We'll take you both on and get you some dry clothes. Just hold on a few minutes more till we get Hannah." The boat scraped the shore. Still dazed, Hannah accepted the miracle and the prospect of a journey like a docile child. Then, after 2 shaky steps, she turned obstinate. She would not set foot in a boat without her cat. "I can't go off without her," she insisted. "I just can't. And thee ought to know that, Nate. She'd just grieve her heart out with no home to go to, and me gone off on a ship." "Then I'll get her," said Nate. "You wait here, and keep quiet, both of you." Kit was outraged. If she had been Nate, she would have picked Hannah up and carried her off in the boat with no more nonsense. As he strode up the bank, she scrambled after him through the wet underbrush. "You're crazy, Nate," she protested, her teeth chattering with cold. "No cat is worth it. You've got to get her out of here. If you could have heard these people. If she's set on that cat, she's going to have it. They've taken everything else." Nate stood in the midst of the charred cinders that had been the little house. "Damn them," he choked. "Curse all of them." He kicked a smoldering log viciously. They searched the trampled garden, and presently they heard a cautious meow. The yellow cat inched warily from beneath a pumpkin vine. She did not take the idea of capture. They had to stalk her, one on each side of the garden, and Nate finally died full length under a bush, dragged the cat out, and wrapped it tightly in his own shirt. Back at the shore, Hannah received the writhing bundle with joy and climbed obediently onto the rowboat. "Where are we going, Nate?" she asked trustfully. "I'm going to take you to Saybrook for a visit with my grandmother. You'll be good company for her, Hannah. Come on, Kit. Father will go on without us." "I'm not going, Nate. All I wanted was to see Hannah safe." Nate straightened up. "I think you'd better, Kit," he said quietly. "Till this thing blows over, at least. This is our last trip before winter. We'll find a place for you in Saybrook and bring you back first trip next spring." Kit shook her head. "Or you can go to the West Indies with us." "Barbados?" The tears sprang to her eyes. "I can't, Nate. I have to stay here." The concern in his eyes hardened to awareness. "Of course," he said courteously. "I forgot you're going to be married." "'Tis Mercy," she stammered. "She's terribly ill. I couldn't go. I just couldn't go, not knowing—" Nate looked intently at her and took one step nearer. The blue eyes were very close. "Kit." "Ahoy there!" There was a bellow from the Dolphin. "What's keeping you?" "Nate, quick! They'll hear the shouting." Nate jumped into the boat. "You'll be all right. You need to get warm. I'll go home now. Only hurry." She stood watching as the boat pulled away from the sand. Halfway to the ship, Nate turned to stare back at her. Then he raised an arm silently. Kit raised her own arm to wave back, and then she turned and started back along the shore. She dared not wait to see them reach the Dolphin. In another moment she would lose every shred of common sense and pride and ding herself into the water after the rowboat and plead with them not to leave her behind. Though it was long past daybreak now, her luck still held. She met no one in the north field. Once she dodged behind a brush pile as the town herder came by with some cows to pasture. She reached the house without further danger. The shed door was still unbolted, and she let herself in and crept noiselessly through the house. She heard a murmur of voices, and as she reached the hallway, the door to the kitchen opened. "Is that you, Kit?" Aunt Rachel peered at her. "We decided to let you sleep, poor child. Dr. Buckley has been here all night. Praise God, he says the fever is broken." In her joy and weariness, Aunt Rachel did not even notice the sodden dress and hair under Kit's woolen cloak.